far is Byron Street?
1.1 miles.
In 1.1 miles, turn right on West Byron Street.
Hi everybody. Starting off right away, please don't mind my sniffles and croaky voice because I have a cold. Apparently I seem to be one of those people who get sick when they travel. True to form, here I am. And that's because over the past weekend, my sisters and I went to Chicago to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Riots at Pride Fest. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. We had a ton of fun. It was great. We saw drag shows and we just hung out. We had good food and it was just a lot of fun. Great atmosphere, great people, just great all around. It was awesome. And we were lucky enough that we have family in Chicago who we could stay with, so we went with some cousins and stayed with my aunts and uncles and all that great stuff. But more importantly than the fun and the fair and everything that was going on was the remembrance of the Stonewall anniversary. It's really kind of peculiar that we remember this particular moment in the wider gay rights movement. And that's really because of one thing, and it's because it really meshed what was going on before in terms of activism with some of the newer ideology and energy that was popping up around the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement and the anti-war movement and all of that great stuff that was happening in the 1960s and 1970s. Stonewall kind of acted as like a merger, and really that's the only reason it is the big deal that it is now and the rallying point. If it wasn't for that, it really would have been a fairly insignificant event. But that being as it may, and as it is, it's important to remember because it has taken on to symbolize a great deal of what we've worked for and what we've struggled for as individuals and as a group for rights of basic humanity that so many have struggled for. So that being said, I really wanted to take a look at just more of why this came to be, more of the journey that we've come through from way back early times to now, where we can have pride fests and pride parades and we can go out there and show our faces and not be worried about being arrested or losing our jobs or families for the most part. I won't say that's true in every case, but just the fact that pride festivals and pride parades are a thing shows a great deal of progress just in the last 50 years. So let's jump back and take a look at the United States, and in particular New York, at the time just before Stonewall, during Stonewall, and after Stonewall, in kind of that 2, 3, 4 year time During the 1950s and 1960s is when the gay rights movement really began to take hold in the United States, and Stonewall happened in 1969. So this is actually still quite a time before Stonewall. Again, Stonewall was not the beginning of the gay rights movement. It often gets pointed out as that, but that's not at all true. Lots of people had really started activism and kind of had a grassroots movement going before Stonewall even happened. And their goals were much of the same as what would come to be known after the time of Stonewall. But first, let's talk about some of the culture and what people who identified as part of the LGBT community could expect to experience in day-to-day life. Well, first of all, homosexuality was considered illegal, and public acts of affection could get you arrested. Not only that, but you were considered to have a mental illness, classified in the DSM manual. So you were classified to have a mental illness, and it was illegal for you to have that mental illness, which really honestly makes absolutely no sense. Because, I mean, think of it this way. We consider, like, schizophrenia, we'll just go with that one, schizophrenia to be a mental illness. So if we were saying that schizophrenia is a mental illness, and it was illegal for you to have schizophrenia, and we were arresting people on the street just because they had schizophrenia, I don't think that would go down very well. But somehow it did in the case of homosexuality. You could be considered having a mental illness, and it was illegal if you had that mental illness. Now, of course, we no longer consider homosexuality a mental illness, and it has been removed from the DSM-5. But at the time, I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. None of it makes any sense. I'm not trying to claim that it does or ever did. But that is kind of the depth of how bizarre this was. Okay, off rant. So, besides the illegality and the mental illness, in which you could be arrested and or institutionalized on both fronts there, it was considered illegal for, at least in New York, I don't know about the rest of the country, for you to wear less than 3 pieces of gender appropriate clothing, i.e. clothing that matched your assigned gender at birth. Furthermore, besides the legal aspects of everything, you were just shunned in general. There'd be signs on bars and establishments saying that you were not welcome. Homosexuals not welcome. Because the bars could be criminally punished for serving someone who was a known homosexual. You essentially lived your life as a fugitive just for being who you are. You could be fired from a job very easily, even if you were just suspected. It was, and again, going back to if this was considered a mental illness, it's just so backwards. I can't even verbalize how backwards that is. If we treated people who we accepted to have a mental illness now the way that they did then with homosexual people, I mean, people with real actual mental illnesses weren't necessarily treated any better, but anyway, okay. So basically that's the life you could expect to live. You were shunned, you were in constant fear of being arrested. Most of the time you were often arrested. You could be institutionalized at any time. You were told that you had a mental illness, that you were diseased, that you were disgusting, and that you were illegal. That was your life. You lived in the shadows. You had no rights, and you were in constant fear of losing everything that you had just because of your sexuality. So, come June 1969, June 28th, 1969 to be more specific, in the early hours in the morning, really was just like any other day. The Stonewall Inn was open for business, and the reason that they did and could serve homosexual patrons was because, like many other gay bars, Stonewall Inn was run by the mafia, organized crime, and they were already criminals, so why not take advantage of the untapped market where other establishments could not. So many gay bars were actually run by the mafia in this sense. It was not at all uncommon for institutions like this, and even for Stonewall itself, to be raided by police. But most of the time when they were, the managers of the bar were kind of let in on it beforehand, and they could flip on the lights and kind of signal for everybody to just like scatter, get out, or at least stop any displays of affection and all that kind of stuff while the raid happened, and then kind of go back to normal, or probably most likely be done for the night and just kind of go home. But so that was a normal night. This night in particular was a little different because they were not let in. I don't know if it was a different precinct that raided them or just a different division or group of officers than normally did, but for whatever reason they were not tipped off about the police raid beforehand, and they got raided, and the police started arresting a lot of people for the managers for lack of liquor license, and they started arresting a lot of people on the dress code laws. Pulled up a police van and started putting people in the back. And the one thing that was a little different, other than not being tipped off, because it did happen that people weren't tipped off before, and that this kind of thing did happen. Usually when it did, people just sort of dispersed. But this time, people gathered around the bar, and really it was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It was just one too many times and one too many injustices for this community to accept. And for whatever reason, someone threw the first rock or the first bottle at the police officers. And from there, full-out riot ensued that lasted 5 to 6 days. It's a little bit debated by historians exactly how long it lasted, but about 5 to 6 days. And during the time of the riot, things got so bad on the first night that the police officers barricaded themselves into the bar, waiting for backup, and had the bar almost set on fire multiple times by the patrons outside, and the barricades were broken through multiple times. But eventually that night calmed down when backup arrived and the police were able to unbarricade themselves. So it kind of died down overnight, and the uprising started the next day, and that's where people really began demanding rights during this riot. That's where it kind of took a turn for. And I believe that this really is kind of the reason why it's debated whether it was a riot or an uprising, because it really was both. It was a riot. It started out as a riot, and it kind of transformed into an uprising and a gathering of community for rights of the people. That was the Stonewall Uprising. That was the Stonewall Riots. It really wasn't anything that unusual or that spectacular. It wasn't even the first time a riot had happened. There wasn't anything that special about the building. There wasn't anything that special about the bar. There really wasn't anything that special about the night. It just was that. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back. What's important about Stonewall, though, is, like I said before, the merger. And what did it merge? It merged the old with the energy. It merged the activism with the energy of the people. And from there, following Stonewall, we see organizations pop up, such as the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance, to name two of the big ones, and some of the most notable. From those two organizations, we really see a lot more outward demand for justice and for rights. We see dances, we see coming outs, we see protest marches, we see different organizational meetings, and people really became more vocal and more out. People were much more out through those organizations. And that really is where some of that change comes in. It's really from some of those groups that we can see more direct correlation with. So what have we gotten out of 50 years of Pride? And really more than 50 years, but 50 years since Stonewall it sounds pretty clean, so we'll go with that. 50 years of Pride has taken us a long way from where we were. It's no longer illegal to be homosexual. We can have things like pride parades, pride marches, and pride festivals. We can attend them without being terrified of losing everything, for the most part. Same-sex marriage has been legalized, even though that took a lot of energy and a lot of work. It all has. But there's still a long way to go, and it's continually a scary place. Trans rights are really disgustingly low and are a high priority for many, but do continue to face a lot of backlash. So do, just in the small ways, oppression in small ways, bullying, suicide rates are still extremely high, parents disowning children, all these kinds of things still continue to put pressure and harm children and adults who identify as LGBT. So there's no denying that there is a long way to go, but there's also no denying that there has come a long way. And I think it's important to look at both and to really see a full picture, to not be discouraged by everything that hasn't happened yet, by looking at what has and realizing that because of that hard work and because of that, however many years you want to put that back, we've come so far that maybe with another 50, 60 years, be able to go even farther. That really is the great thing about finding these marks and being able to remember and celebrate them, is you can look back at the past, look at your present, and imagine what could be in the future. And that's why history and remembering it is often so important. Well, I hope you guys all had a wonderful Pride Month. If you like this video and you want to hear more about different pieces of history and different time periods, then go ahead and subscribe below. I make new videos, or I try to every week, so I will see you guys all next week. Bye then.
Yes, work it, angular. Angular dog. Pride.